Labor have been in power for 30 out of 35 years that we knew we were up against it. You look at the financial gerrymander that we have to deal with. It is a massive financial gerrymander. Every union in Queensland gets spent $1 million because of laws brought in by Labor.
Do you want developers to be able to donate again in Queensland?
They should be able to develop.
Yes, we don't have that money. We're actually a poor political party. We rely on the volunteers. We do not have the unions and the thug-like behaviour we see on booths. If the LNP had the unions in Queensland, we would never lose an election.
But how much did you notice social media making a difference in the way that leaders interacted with the public?
Huge. Oh, you'd be out on the campaign trail and the leaders would be walking down the street to do the street walk, to meet people. And I'd have people coming up to me saying, hey, is that the guy off TikTok? And I'd say, yes, that's the Premier, Stephen Miles.
Clearly, the more Queenslanders saw of Stephen Miles, the more they liked him. And in the reverse, the more they saw of David Crisafulli, I think the less they believed him.
I can't stand watching Stephen. I'm sorry, former Premier. I just can't stand watching you because I just see through it. But the thing was, he presented in a better way. He wasn't. I'm afraid David was scaring people a bit. He is energetic and he's focused, but he scared people.
David Crisafulli, was winning this election for 4 years. He's blown it in 4 weeks.
And it's a fourth-term government. I mean, we don't have fourth-term governments at a pretty tough time for incumbents. At a very tough time. So
it sounds like you're rejecting the analysis from many at the end of this campaign that the LNP have squandered a big lead.
Yeah, no, I don't accept it.
When Stephen took over as leader, it was at a time when Labor was going to get obliterated.
If Labor could govern like they campaign, we wouldn't be in the crises that we are, and that's the sad part.
But what's gone wrong? Because I've got the news poll here from September, just over a month ago, where it said, LNP was going to come in with about a 42 primary, Labor was going to go down to 30, and it would all be over. So what has gone wrong?
Nothing's gone wrong.
Nothing has gone.
Abortion. This was not on my bingo card when it came to this election campaign, say 6 months ago.
I don't think any of us hoped it would ever be.
Well, what are we doing back here again, Murray?
When the laws were changed a few years ago, it was a big deal, but, people, I think in many ways it was politicians catching up with where the community already was at. You saw David Crisafulli and the LNP get into massive tangles trying to explain what their position was. Of course, David had a number of his members come out and say things that were pretty unhelpful for him. And
we saw abortion become a huge issue in this campaign. And towards the end of it, we saw some, those in the Nationals, some pretty senior figures like Barnaby Joyce and Jacinta Price start to talk about this, Matt Canavan.
It is still an issue, and it's not just about yes or no is illegal, it's about access. And there are still a lot of parts of Queensland where it's very difficult to get access to an abortion. There's still, I think, one government-funded hospital that denies access to abortions as well, because the government essentially privatised that service. So you've got a privately run hospital with government funding that doesn't provide access to abortion. So I don't think it's correct to say that this issue is all done and dusted. There's still an ongoing struggle to ensure that every woman who needs access to that service can get it.
When we're talking about whether or not to repeal laws and go backwards in time, that's a whole different story.
Well, yeah, and I'm very worried about that.
Yeah.
If we do see an LNP government.
The LNP was slow to get on top of it, absolutely, I back you in there.
Yes.
But I think it's a grubby Americanisation that we all got to this position when Crisafulli was targeted over the issue of it being a conscience vote or not. Well, it went through the parliament under Labor, as a conscience vote, as it should and should always be a conscience vote.
When you are pre-selecting very strong anti-choice candidates to be part of your team, and he says he knows his team and that somehow they're not going to take their conscious vote and repeal the legislation.
And he had some good female candidates.
Yeah, which I don't think you've ever seen that from the Conservative side of politics. One of the issues that the Libs have had for a long time is where they put the women. They put the women in the marginals when they want to win, but they're not in the safe seats. So when we're in opposition, we lose that pipeline.
35 seats for an opposition in Queensland. Can you be a credible opposition with 35 seats in the parliament?
Well, we showed that we could be a credible opposition with 7 and destroyed Campbell Newman with 7.
They couldn't even say the name Newman or Newman government this campaign.
Was this because it was just so humiliating to reduce the Labor Party to 6 seats and then somehow manage to lose it in a term?
Well, exactly.
It seems almost impossible that someone...
7.
Well,
Sorry,
7 seats.
From a government...
Every seat counts.
Got the number in the Tarago.
Well,
The challenge the LNP will have is that they seem to have won a lot of votes by promising to lock up children in response to youth crime. But we know that locking up children doesn't actually make communities safer. It doesn't actually deal with the underlying issues or the long-term problems that causes.
It is crime and it is youth crime. It is the #1 issue in this electorate. Whether they've been affected by youth crime or whether they're fearful of youth crime, doesn't matter. It is an issue for the voters.
It's not backed up by the data, it's not backed up by the statistics, but I guess it's their lived experience.
Well, youth crime rates are dropping and people are talking about it more. That's really what's going on. And it's been very convenient for the right to say your insecurity is because of kids. That's what's happened. People are legitimately concerned and frustrated about the state of society, and the LNP and others have given them a really convenient, simplistic answer, which is not really going to, locking up more kids isn't going to put your rent down. Locking up more kids is going to make groceries cheaper. It's not even going to help those kids. It's not even going to make us safer. It's just something we've started to say to distract us from all that other stuff that really we need to be talking more about.
The LNP are just making it up, but maybe tonight they're going to have to demonstrate to Queenslanders how you spend more, tax less, not have $1 more of debt and deliver $7 billion.
They're trying to resolve the contradictions of a broken system. Our system is not serving ordinary people very well, and you've got, whether it's Labor or Liberal, trying to maintain a certain level of profitability for larger businesses and the corporate sectors, so they don't want to tax big corporations more. But at the same time, you've got ordinary people struggling, needing more social support. So unless they're willing to increase those tax rates, increase those mining royalties, they don't really have the funds coming in to do everything that people are expecting of them. So they're forced into this situation where they have to rob Peter to pay Paul, and they can't pay for this if they pay for that, when really the problem they're trying to avoid is having that conversation about corporate tax rates.
You are kidding, please. Like, we're going to drive this country off a cliff. This is banana republic stuff.
No.
It is. It is. I beseech you. This is nonsense. We cannot do this. We cannot borrow to fund kids' school lunches.
If you invest in public transport, that means you're moving more people by buses and trains. That means you have to spend less money on road widening, and God knows highways are a black hole for public funds. Similarly, if you put that money up front into good early stage healthcare, then you don't have as many people presenting to emergency rooms later on. So it's a bit of a myth to say, oh, these cost of living measures, they're going to cost someone down the track, they're going to cause a budget blowout in the future. Not necessarily. A lot of these are really sensible investments.
Success comes in many forms, right? At this stage, we've seen as good as free public transport being adopted by Labor and by both the major parties. We've seen Labor bring in free GP clinics, free school lunches. We're seeing them, taking on some little increases in a battle with the mining industry.
Do you think the focus on you has been unfair?
That have only been achieved because of the Greens.
Do you think we're still getting to the point of peak green?
Well, I think one of the great things that's happened is we saw back in 2010, and you remember it well, the Liberal Party used to preference the Greens. That's how Adam Bandt got into Parliament. We saw at the 2020 election in South Brisbane.
We didn't preference the Greens, we just preferenced Labor last. But anyway, keep going.
Well, yeah, Adam Bandt.
You guys are pretty happy.
And never took responsibility
anyway.
For it.
What does the LNP think about the Labor preferences going to the Greens there to help them?
That's right. Well, that's right. I mean, it's a bit of a forked tongue, we think, that constantly complaining about the Greens but preferencing them. And
they love them in the election time, though.
And I'd say to my Labor friends, well, we're putting them last. I'd encourage you to put them last because they have become a blot on Australia's democracy. They are the new nasty party. They are racist. They are anti-Semitic. They're just so ugly of how they campaign. Let's have a pact. Let's put them last.
But what we are finding is, for every vote that they pick up in the millennial sort of age segment, they lose one in the older vote segment as well. So they're sort of going one step forward, one step back at the moment.
I want to see the Labor Party really start to go after them because it's like it's in your interest. You got to push their primary down. And
I think the Labor guys can do it.
Yeah.
If it's a cancer on your own side, you've really got to take it head on, like we did with One Nation. And I think this is where the Labor Party's gotten too comfortable with the Greens, thinking they can win their people back. You got to take them head on.
I don't think the Greens are going to have a good night tonight. Anyway, that's what I'm hoping.
Well, I think we're all hoping that. Actually,
but I think it's going to be the case.
Just to your point too, I think Labor has done a very good job at capitalising on the youth vote, and a lot of those young people would have been thinking about voting Green.
And when you think about Gen Z, they don't know the Greens political party as the
cardigan-wearing, chamber orchestra-loving, compost-tending environmentalists who care about dams. Like that trope, and it is a trope, I admit it's a trope, that's not the Greens political party that Gen Z has known. And I think the Greens these days look incredibly radical compared to the Greens of the original, the original generation of Greens.
But what would you say to the argument that Labor here in Queensland has adopted some or similar policies that the Greens have been advocating for a while? Maybe if you did that federally.
These are universalist cost of living measures. So Labor didn't say we'll make public transport cheaper just for people on low incomes. They didn't say we'll make free school lunches free just for poorer families. They've made these available universally, and I think that's a really good thing. It's played well with voters because it cuts across some of that divisive class politics. It says everyone deserves these basic essential services, and I think that was a really good move by Labor. Obviously, I'm pleased they're picking up on some of those Greens ideas, but it's interesting that in a lot of seats now, we're seeing as many as 1/3 of voters voting for someone other than the two major parties. In some cases, it's Carter and One Nation. In some cases, it's Greens. Occasionally, it's even legalised cannabis. That is a fundamental shift in Queensland politics, where once upon a time, we had wall-to-wall two-party dominance and third parties didn't get a look in. But now we're seeing almost 1 in 3 Queensland voters in a lot of electorates are choosing someone else other than the two major parties. And again, I think that speaks to the deep sense of frustration people have, not just with individual parties, but with the political system as a whole. People are frustrated, they are angry, and they feel like government isn't listening. And so whoever ends up in power in a given election cycle is really going to carry that frustration to the next one.
Yeah. Well, whoever it is has a lot of work to do, I guess.